Friends, this begins the first of 3 sessions on the Discourse of Abdu'l. It's a very passionate subject for me. I spent a lot of time this last year looking at the thematic elements of Abdu'l's talks. This was originally inspired by a letter of Shoghi Effendi, which I'm sure I've read in the past, but it didn't quite sink in. He would advise you to study the talks of Abdu'l as his method of approaching the mind of the public cannot be surpassed. Study the talks of Abdu'l as his method of approaching the mind of the public cannot be surpassed. Somehow this suggests that all of our teaching work in one way or another should be related to Abdu'l's approach. What was his style? What were the distinguishing features of his presentations? In order to do this, of course, this centenary year has been a very opportune occasion, if you will, to look more carefully at the Master's visit to the West, to reread the talks, to read some of the wonderful accounts that have come out this past year about the incidents and the people surrounding the talks. It's been estimated that some 90,000 people heard Abdu'l speak in America. There's those that contest that and say it should be 5 times as much, but the Master himself said that he hadn't fallen short of delivering the message, and that beside the talks that he gave, many of them were published over and over in newspapers in their entirety. So many other people had access to hearing the basic principles. For instance, the Stanford talk got publicized all over the country, and other talks in New York as well. If people wanted to hear or were listening at all, they could hear. Such a tremendous outpouring of energy on the part of the Master. Imagine, he's been a prisoner for some 40 years. He's never been to school. His interaction with Western audiences was limited to pilgrims at his table, for the most part. And he's ill, not feeling well at all, in his second half of the 60-year-old. But with the life that he led, he was, I think, more aged than one would imagine at that age. His ailments, interestingly enough, whenever the friends were noticing, he'd draw on that divine energy he had and show them that But when he fell back to his own means again, he was not well. He had some problems, nervous fevers when he was tired, arthritis. Oddly enough, we didn't have a clear picture of what was the matter with Abdu'l, even at the World Center, where there's some mention of it in God Passes By. But in recent years, we did a survey of the tablets in Turkish of Abdu'l. He's revealed beautiful prayers and beautiful tablets in Turkish in general for the friends. But then also he carried on quite a voluminous correspondence with Ottoman Empire officials or ex-officials, people he'd met along the way who had felt sympathy with him and would correspond with him. And I must say the major content of the messages written to Abdu'l by these people are mostly griping about their physical conditions. That now they're old, now they can't do anything, they've lost their post, they've lost their money, my back hurts, my leg is killing me, I have headaches, so on. Abdu'l answers them and sympathizes with them, and then says, I'm suffering also, my knee is hurting, and I have fevers all the time, and what else could he tell them? Well, there's much else he could share with them. So he shared his physical ailments, which he would never tell the Baha'is about, but they're in those letters, so he sees a little bit more about them. There's also an account from Juliet Thompson says that one night after Abdu'l had given 3 talks during the day and had a fever and had to go to a 4th meeting to give a 4th talk, and she was just insisting, "Oh, beloved Master, please, you can't do this. You've got to take care of yourself. Why you just leave this one? You can do it tomorrow, or you can do it another time, or whatever." Abdu'l said, "No." And she said, "But you're ill." He said, "Yes, I'm ill." And he said, "With one prayer, with one verse, I can remove all my illnesses. But I don't, because I want the friends to see that they can serve even in times of sickness." I hope we're all getting that message, because there's times when sometimes we don't feel very good and we have to do something for the faith. And just remember that the Master pushed on with those ailments so that we might learn that lesson. This little pamphlet, we've put up the connections for this. This is a reprint of chapter 19 of God Passes By, Abdu'l's travels in Europe and America. And friends, if you haven't made a study or read carefully this chapter during the centenary year, I highly recommend it to you. It's the most succinct picture of Abdu'l's travels and the memorable events he took part in or initiated. All of it very, very useful, very, very important. I was thinking there's one, for example, there are, if you analyze all the paragraphs there, I think there's 26 paragraphs. The 22nd paragraph was a brief description, one of the few that Shoghi Effendi chose to include in the chapter. I'd like to read that for you. When Abdu'l visited this country for the first time in 1912, a commentator on his American travels has written, he found a large and sympathetic audience waiting to greet him personally and to receive from his own lips his loving and spiritual message. Beyond the words spoken, there was something indescribable in his personality that impressed profoundly all who came into his presence. The dome-like head, the patriarchal beard, the eyes that seemed to have looked beyond the reach of time and sense, the soft yet clearly penetrating voice, the translucent humility, the never-failing love, but above all, the sense of power mingled with gentleness that invested his whole being with a rare majesty of spiritual exaltation that both set him apart and yet brought him near to the lowliest soul. It was all this and much more that can never be defined that have left with his many friends memories that are ineffaceable and unspeakably precious. The main record of Abdu'l talks is in the Promulgation of Universal Peace. I think some 160 talks there. Then Paris talks. We have Paris, the time he was in Paris and his first period in Europe. Wonderful talks. A few in Abdu'l in London, and other additional talks that are now showing up because of scholarly work, where the certain talks that were given that we knew about we didn't have an account of, but that the organizations that he spoke to published transcripts of his talks. It's been estimated that he gave some 600 talks. We have 160, 170 of them and all. So you can see there's a lot more scholarship to be done. We don't know how much we'll come up with. There are variant accounts of the talks. There are notes by 2 different transcribers that are not totally in sync. So whether they were paraphrasing the things as they put them down or not, we don't know. The nature of the talks is not authoritative unless we have Persian transcripts and unless Abdu'l has approved those transcripts. So we're dealing with a lot of material that's not the same as tablets. Yet, they contain so much of benefit to us, all of which can be compared and confirmed by tablets themselves, because there's a lot of the material you find references to again in other places of Abdu'l. So it's not to discount the things. The reason we say that, a tablet has to be authenticated if it's to be imposed on the friends. That is, if you're responsible to carry out whatever the tablet says. In the talks in America, Abdu'l gives lots of admonitions. He urges the friends in many different ways to carry out the teachings of Baha'u'llah. All of it very helpful to us. And it doesn't matter whether it's mandatory or not in that sense. The talks divide themselves easily into two areas. The talks he gave to the public, proclaiming the principles of his father's faith, and the talks he gave to the Baha'i community, oftentimes speaking quite directly, very lovingly to them. It has a whole different tone when he's speaking to the Baha'is than when he's speaking to the public. So you want to distinguish those when you look at the talks also. He urges the Baha'is to make efforts to arise, to strive, to do everything they can to become Baha'is, to attain to excellence, to become distinguished. All the things that we've seen little bits and pieces of here and there are there, and you want to kind of, if you could collect those talks and analyze everything, you find that very, very rewarding, a very rewarding study. His talks to the public are, on the whole, very rational in character. Reasoned. He reasons with the public. He sets out a series of observations or facts about nature, about man, or wherever he's going with it, and gradually leads to the points that he wants to make, but in a very reasonable fashion. This is in fulfillment of some of his own tablets. Oh, I've left those. I'll bring them to you next time. Some quotes about the nature of proofs and evidences. He says that the friends should learn the proofs and evidences. Now, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most important sources of these proofs, of the rational discourse, if you will, of Abdu'l, are found in these talks. And as you read them over and over, certain things begin to stick. They begin to gel in your mind, so to speak, and enable you then to speak out in a very interesting manner about the faith in ways that you will find are new to you and also at the same time quite effective. For instance, we generally, when we're presenting the principles of the faith in one way or another, we say that the Baha'i faith teaches, or Baha'is believe, or Baha'is teach that, and we give the principle. Not Abdul Baha. He says, Baha'u'llah enjoined upon the peoples of the world the independent investigation of truth. Sounds different from saying Baha'is believe in an unfettered search after truth. Oh, that's nice. That's fine. No, we have the supreme manifestation of God calling on all mankind to wake up. It's a much more powerful call. And over throughout the principles, he sets forth that kind of an approach. Very, very useful to weigh it, to observe, to watch how he introduces the subjects that he introduces. What does he say about Baha'u'llah? He suddenly brings Baha'u'llah into the picture, Baha'u'llah appeared on the horizon of humanity and proclaimed the oneness of the day of God, or whatever. He lists all the different things that when he wants to introduce this. Or Baha'u'llah appeared on the eastern horizon in Persia at a time of great degradation and darkness. And his life-giving, illuminating teachings raised up people who wouldn't associate with each other at all, and instilled in them a love and a sacrifice that transformed the heart of that land. So how do we introduce Baha'u'llah to the public? What do we say? If we can say in the language of the Guardian, surely the founder of the Baha'i faith is Baha'u'llah and so on. But saying something about his coming into the world and the influence of what he had when he came, to me, I find it more penetrating, and it's easier to reach people with it. It's like sometimes we don't explain the principles very well. We just say them, like with a smile. We Baha'is believe in universal peace. Isn't that nice? Well done, thank you. I'm so glad you can believe in it. It just leaves the listener perplexed, as to either we're terribly naive or we see some peace that they don't see. What is the principle? The principle is that Baha'u'llah has brought the means. He's described those principles necessary to implement so that we might reach the supreme goal of universal peace for mankind. I have a different kind of a story. Or the other one we always say, we believe men and women are equal. Yeah, okay, you can say that's all right, but it's pretty limited in, some people notice some differences, between men and women. And some people said, long live the differences as well. So it's a good thing you kind of have to explain yourself. We're talking about rights and opportunities and education and privileges have to be equal across the board for men and women. Then people there's something easier to take a hold of, Proofs and evidences. Abdu'l told, again we have this source from Juliet Thompson. Proofs and evidence, the master said. Proofs and evidences, Juliet. Smiles are not enough. How do we teach, It's wonderful to be a loving Baha'i teacher and full of good cheer and smiles, but if we can bring reasoned arguments gently but firmly to the attention of people, we can help win them over to an interest in the faith. So we're supposed to look at Abdu'l's presentation. Shoghi Effendi, we can be grateful in one of these messages in the 1920s that you'll find in Baha'i Administration on page 69. He says, let us bear in mind the example which our beloved Master has clearly set before us. And then he breaks it down eight points. Wise and tactful in his approach. Wakeful and attentive in his early discourse or intercourse with the people. Broad and liberal in all his public utterances. Cautious and gradual in unfolding of the essential verities of the cause. Passionate in his appeal, yet sober in argument. Confident in tone, unswerving in conviction, dignified in his manners. Such were the distinguishing features of our beloved's noble presentation of the cause of Baha'u'llah. You can search around. That's, as I say, Baha'i Administration, page 69. Worth picking each one of those points and meditating on a bit. The breakdown of the thematic elements we've used in a seminar in Europe just this past month called The Discourse of Abdu'l. And again, we'll give you a URL, a PDF or something like that on the board a bit later where you can actually access this. The thematic elements that seem to suggest themselves in going through the Master's talks, apart from the principles themselves, which obviously were a content of many of his speeches, he deals with such subjects as civilization, the two pathways for humanity, material civilization and spiritual civilization. Now, immediately hearing this, you'll remember things that you've probably read or thought about with respect to the talks. There's a great deal about nature, science, and man. Man being eventually proven to be the ruler of nature, a part of nature in one way, but with his intellectual powers, he's the ruler of nature. He penetrates nature, discovers nature's secrets, and uses them for his own benefit. Something that none of the animals can do. None of the animals can figure out that the earth is round. None of the animals can discover that we're rotating around the sun. All these things are entirely beyond the animal kingdom. But the intellectual powers of man allow him to make these discoveries. And from those he derives benefits. And also he derives some terrible other instruments of brutality and so on. More reason that the Master says we have to introduce divine civilization as a counterbalance to material civilization. With respect to man, of course, he goes on to speak about the greatness of his sciences and eventually about his immortality, a number of talks where he touches on the immortality of the human spirit. He addresses a great deal of the knowledge that he pours forth on the subject of the prophets, or the manifestations of God, their mission and purpose. And he has these wonderful elaborations on divine springtime and the returning of the spring after the winter of materialism and darkness and atheism, how again the divine springtime appears in the world. There's some history and succession of the prophets showing the parallel themes to the Book of Certitude about the coming in a progressive, systematic manner of the prophets of God and their mission. And then there's a good deal addressed to the public about God and reality. The gathering of these quotations makes it quite clear that the reality itself, as we know from the Ghaneh and from other places, the divinity, the essence of God himself is beyond all comprehension or description. But then he likens, for the sake of an intellectual picture for us, that the divinity or that essence is like the sun, and the rays that come off the sun are embodied in the prophets of God, who are the mirror of the Son of reality, the Son of truth. Both this term is the same in Persian, but sometimes it's translated Son of reality, sometimes Son of truth. That becomes translated usually in the Guardian's writings as Day Star of truth or Day Star of reality. There are a number of points there that will be interesting to refer to. A good deal about love of God, the role of the love of God in creation and nearness to God, and about the image and likeness of God, which is appealed across the audiences of past religions because of its references in the different holy books. And of course, Abdu'l then elaborates on the question of us being the image and likeness of the names and attributes of God as expressed in the manifestations of God, not with any implication that God himself is anthropomorphic in any way. He has no human form, he has no information or sort of form in a physical like we would understand. He completely transcends imagination. If he could become the plaything of our minds, he would no longer be God. So in case you have any playthings in your mind about God, you can be pretty sure that's what God isn't, you know. Mr. Ferdinand used to tell a story because he studied in Moscow, and it was very dangerous to say you believed in God, or that they might suspect that you believe in God. And he was studying sciences and education and things of the sort. But his roommate was becoming increasingly suspicious because it seemed like Ferdinand meditated, he was quiet at times, and he had a certain serenity about him that I think bothered the other guys. So he said one time, he said, "You believe in God, don't you?" Ferdinand looked at him and he said, "I don't believe in the God you don't believe in." And that is the answer to all atheists. You know? They reject God. We likewise reject that God that they reject. Absolutely. Any idea about God that they reject, that's also we reject that idea. So there's a bridge to people. Somehow they're in a more honest position than the ones that have swallowed a dogma that they can't really rationalize and understand, and are fearful lest they lose that connection with their faith. So don't get too excited about so many people turning to atheism. Sometimes you think about the arguments of Abdu'l, the proofs Abdu'l gives, how you can connect with these people. Because some of them become so excited when they hear a new definition of religion, in the sense that we have it. We certainly, all of our teachings condemned the religions that the atheists condemn as being dogmatic, as being imitations of religion, as being the principal cause of war, bloodshed, destruction, and death in the history of mankind. Abdu'l puts it right on the imitations of religion. Do we realize that? Do we know that from the talks? It's a powerful thing to deal with when you're talking to people who've rejected religion on the grounds that it's a source of conflict and divisiveness in the world. Baha'u'llah has come, as Abdu'l states so clearly, to rescue humanity from this predicament. And he said it will never happen unless everyone takes up the duty of investigating reality. And he defines reality as the revealed word of God, as the fundamental scriptural basis of people's belief. And he appeals to people to move on. A Christian becoming a Christian because their father was a Christian, or a Jew being a Jew because his father was a Jew, or a Buddhist being a follower of Buddha because his father was. So this will only perpetuate the differences we have. And Baha'u'llah has come to proclaim on the part of one God that all these religions in their foundations are one, and all of them teach and incarnate love and agreement and cooperation for mankind. Do you have your papers with you? You have the quote about the one by one to study the principles. I wanted to quote that too. I'm sorry, it's not here. I'll cite Abdu'l talks about the principles that, of course, he's proclaimed throughout his trips, and the importance that they have for us. And he calls upon the Baha'is to study these principles one by one, both from the point of view of their social implications and also their spiritual meaning. And I found that very helpful in studying the principles in this way. And by the way, in the chapter in God Passes By, when these teachings are summarized, thank you, in paragraph 7 of Chapter 19 of God Passes By, Shoghi Effendi summarizes the principles which Abdu'l proclaimed on behalf of his father in his trip. He doesn't summarize any of the other teachings, so that becomes the most central part of his presentation. In one of his talks in Europe, he says the principles of the teachings of Baha'u'llah should be carefully studied, one by one, until they are realized and understood by mind and heart. So will you become strong followers of the light, truly spiritual, heavenly soldiers of God, acquiring and spreading true civilization in Persia, in Europe, and in the whole world. Carefully studied one by one until they're realized and understood by mind and heart. That's the essence of this thing. Thank you. I ask you, just as an exercise now, the first principle, which is search after truth. What do you usually say if you raise that principle in a discussion with someone? Do we believe in a search after truth, we believe that we should always look for truth. And if we find a truth greater than the Baha'i faith, well, we'll switch over right away. We say things like this, I think. We think things like this. That's not the principle. The principle is that an unfettered search after truth in an unbiased manner to investigate the foundation of all the religions, to see that your religion and their religion is all the same power, the same divine word of God, with the power to educate the human race in the spiritual dimension of its reality. In one place, Abdu'l says, in establishing this likeness, he says that reality is like the water of the seas, of the oceans. Investigate carefully, you'll find that it's one body of water that's connected all over the world. It has different names in different places, but it's all one reality. It's one water. It's the Atlantic, it's the Pacific, it's the Mediterranean, it's the Indian Ocean, all one reality. What a lovely example. Just, again, taking a little time with the talks of Abdu'l, you'll mine these gems, make them your own. It'll help you in the explanation of the faith. Quite startling to me was the principle of the oneness of mankind, which is usually the second principle that Abdu'l raises. Well, I thought, I understand that, all mankind is one, the earth is one country, mankind is citizens, it's beautiful. Move on. But the Master takes the greatest power, pressure, by laying out, by stating, first of all, that Baha'u'llah proclaimed the oneness of mankind on the basis of God's treatment of mankind. I looked at this, I never thought of that. He says that God treats all the creatures he's created equally. He's provided for them a home, a habitat. He's provided for them food. He's provided for them means to establish all that they need to have a proper social order, to have peace, to have unity amongst themselves, and has appealed to them through his religions successively to establish peace and to have unity and love the one for the other. He says, look at his kindness, his view of creation is like the light of the sun. It shines on the poor and the rich, on the sinful and the despicable equally. And then he appeals to us, how can our attitude to mankind not mirror the reality of God's attitude towards the planet? And appeals to us on that grounds to embrace the wholeness of the human race and to see all as the creatures of God and to see all as created in the image and likeness of God. And how he calls on us then, when observing the shortcomings of our fellow creatures, to overlook these things that have arisen for lack of education, for disadvantages of various sorts. How everyone is in a process of growth and has to be healed. But if we don't overlook each other's shortcomings and forgive them and move on, we'll never be able to reach a state of well-being for the planet, a state of peace and tranquility. He brings that home also in the Baha'i community. The same thing. We have to overlook each other's faults. Shoghi Effendi, how many letters he has. People write and complain bitterly about what some Baha'is have done to them. I accept what the world does, but when my brother and sister Baha'is do these things to me, I just can't bear it. How many of us are more forgiving with the non-Baha'i public than we are with our fellow believers? It isn't that we don't have shortcomings. It isn't that we don't do horrible things to each other. I'm sorry, sitting on the House of Justice for 20 years, I don't think I missed very much of that. But it's part of human nature. But one of the great things we're called to is to arise to this principle of the oneness of mankind, where we overlook such things. We look to another future. We draw people to a vision of mankind and of themselves which transcends these differences and shortcomings. We take the tests that are sent us by the believers and we say, this is sent by Baha'u'llah to help purify me, to help. You know, there's a letter, I've cited it in the book on Forces of Our Time, from The Guardian, in which he says that the Baha'is have to be on their guard lest they think and feel negatively about each other, and thus open the way for dark forces to enter into their lives. I read it, and then I read it again. I said, wait a second. He's saying think and feel. He's not saying speak and, he's not telling you just to shut up. You can't, you're a hypocrite if you have this in your head. You're nice to the people, but you hate their guts, This is not the Baha'i way. He says that'll be hypocrisy. You have to transcend it. And if I could say, the perception, primitive as it may be, that we waste an immense amount of energy by thinking and feeling negatively about each other, or about our family members, or about somebody else, or the way the butcher treats me, I don't know what. All the different things that we put in our mind and we stir around and we stir around and we don't let them go. Our whole outlook on humanity has to be lifted beyond that. You think this is the example of the prophets. Think of the example of Christ, and if we knew more about what we see it in the Master too, how he was forgiving with people, and how we need to be that, and how that attracts a terrific blessing and confirmation to us every time we do it. We're transcending ourselves. We're fulfilling this principle of the oneness of mankind. And that makes us feel good if we do it. What a difference in this country, friends, that I see after having lived abroad for 50 years. We were gone for 50 years, my wife and I. And we come back in the whole ethnic situation. It was principally blacks and whites at the time we left, but then there's the whole Hispanic scene, and then there's Southeast Asians. What is the miracle that out of the wars that we've seen, that we've had immigrations of people of different backgrounds to mix into this terrific society that we have of so many ethnic diversity. This is a terrific thing. And we weren't prepared. We were so pleased. We came back and because we lived in Latin America where the whole question of racial prejudice was much milder. Brazil, there is some, but it's more social prejudice than a color prejudice. And the races have blended, and from the beginning they intermarried, the slave women particularly, with the landowners in Brazil. So it created a whole different dynamic there than we had here in the United States. Come back and see any diversity of ethnic couples on the streets, in restaurants. I don't think California is unique in this. I see it in New York. I see it in the big cities. I think smaller places maybe is taking time to penetrate, but it's so pleasing. It's so wonderful. We've come a long way towards this recognition of the oneness and wholeness of mankind. And that's another principle that Baha'u'llah, that Abdu'l stresses, is this one of we have to overcome prejudices. We have to search them out in our own beings and vanquish them so that we will have that kind of cordiality and love of mankind. All are the image and likenesses of God. It has nothing to do with ethnic backgrounds or racial backgrounds or social backgrounds, for that matter, because there's still a lot of social prejudice in the country. Helping people get beyond these. When Abdu'l, when Corinne True and her daughters visited Abdu'l in 1909, on one occasion he spoke to them. He said, you should view every soul that you meet as a letter from your beloved. He has sent this message to you, and no matter how tarnished the envelope, how blurred the handwriting, how dirty the aspect of it, how torn it might be, yet the message of the beloved is in there, and that thrills you, and you are addressing yourself to that message. And when we treat people in that way, they see something about themselves that they've never seen. This is the wonder of the Baha'i vision of upholding these principles in our actions. It reaches in and touches people. They take hope in what they might be because they see you see something in them that you're taking time to address, and you're shining the light of your love, which is the love of God. And Abdu'l then he takes this idea of the oneness of mankind, he translates, when he talks to the Baha'is, he said, your love has to be like the light of the sun. Your love for mankind is an expression of your love for God. And the love for God is coming from God to you. You're not having to look to the people to see whether you can love them or not. And so you shine the same way on everyone. Of course, you're like everything, we've got extremes. You also don't allow thieves to know that you don't realize they're thieves, or liars that they're not liars. But you don't make a bad face at them, You're treated in a different way. They understand you understand, and still you're loving. It's a whole different kind of relationship that has to grow up in the whole population. And when we have the expression of these truths in a community, as the House of Justice keeps calling on us to create this interaction between our individual role, our communal role, and the role of the institutions, when these become the embodiment of the qualities and principles that Abdu'l proclaimed in America, we'll act as magnets. We'll be attracting people. This is the direction we're going. But it requires a deeper thrust of our roots into the spiritual nature of the cause, to give us that strength, to confirm us to want to act in the way he calls on us to act. It's a terrific difference that it can make. I'll get into the next talk into the principles of science, a little bit of science and religion. A very fascinating subject when you start looking at what the Master said in different talks, which suggests to me that an approach I read about years ago, maybe some of you have heard of Mortimer Adler. He's the general editor of Encyclopedia Britannica and of the great books of the Western world. And he created an institute for philosophical research during his lifetime. He's passed away now. And he talked about syntopical reading, that is, taking a topic in a series of authors, or a series of writings, if you will, and collecting what each says about it and comparing it and understanding so that the terms that don't seem to match come into line with each other, the definition of things. And we can play that same game with our acquired knowledge, our school training, the sharpness that the media has provided us with, and take that to the Baha'i writings and survey, for instance, if we're talking about this, say the principle of independent investigation of search, take out all the paragraphs where Abdu'l refers to this across all of his talks, and compare and see what is it he always mentions, what is it he mentions usually, what is it that he's mentioned only a few times in a unique situation, and what was that situation that prompted him to carry it to a further point of illumination and clarification. And with each of the principles you can do that. And they blend, they're all connected to each other. I think we can move on here. Let's see, how are we doing for time? We've got 20 minutes, I think, something like that, right? Already introduced to you the idea that Abdu'l says to carefully study these principles one by one until they are realized and understood by mind and heart. These are a few just introductory phrases that he's mentioned. He says, I will give you a brief exposition of the fundamental principles of Baha'u'llah's teachings in order that you may be informed of the nature and significance of the Baha'i movement. This is also a very nice approach to the public, you know. Sometimes now on an airplane, I'm sitting next to somebody and we get in a conversation, the faith comes up and they said, Baha'i, what is that? These days, generally, I act terribly surprised, like, oh, really, you've never heard of it? Well, that's very interesting. I seldom meet people who haven't heard of it these days. You know, it's spread all over the world. It's in so many countries and nations. I hope you'll take the time to check it out, Baha'i.org. You can look at it and inform yourself about it, because it has a terrific meaning and importance for humanity. Leave it at that. I can't always pull that off, but sometimes they do it, and the person looks like, gosh, I better inform myself about this. Here's one of these quotes where Abdu'l, just before he's going to introduce the principles, what does he do? He says, for a long time, the divine precepts of the effulgent word, were obscured by clouds of superstition and error, until Baha'u'llah appeared upon the horizon of humanity, rent the shadows, scattered the clouds, and revealed anew the foundations of the teachings of God. This is one of these things you're saying, memorize, you know, memorize a passage like that. And if you feel like you can't quite pull that off from your own to state such a thing, you can say that the son of the founder of Baha'u'llah, when he was in the West, said that for a long time the divine precepts, and you can quote Abdul. It's always good to lean back on his statements, I think. At this time, Baha'u'llah appeared and began devoting himself to the uplift and education of the people. He united divergent sects and creeds, removed religious, racial, patriotic, and political prejudices, and established a strong bond of unity and reconciliation among varying degrees and classes of mankind. The enmity then existing among the people was so bitter and intense that even ordinary association was out of the question, which was the case, you know. The prejudices in Iran, if the shadow of a Jew hit a Muslim, this was a big calamity. You don't know what was likely to happen. Everybody had to be so careful. You couldn't touch the same glass. You couldn't use the same facilities. Nothing. All of it was divided and fractured. Through the power of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, the most wonderful results were witnessed. He removed the prejudices and hatred from human hearts and wrought such transformation in their attitudes toward each other that today in Persia there is perfect accord among hitherto bigoted religionists, varying sects and divergent classes. This was not an easy accomplishment, for Baha'u'llah underwent severe trials, great difficulties, and violent persecution. He was imprisoned, tortures were inflicted upon him, and finally he was banished from his native land. Go see how Abdu'l in the explanation of Baha'u'llah's life brings forth certain principles. Already he's established that he has accomplished the things that he's saying he wants us to accomplish, that he's proclaiming to mankind. He's already done this in a sample case, if you will, in the worst possible situation in Iran. Then he goes on to explain the principles. Again, another sample of how he introduces Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah has risen from the eastern horizon. Like the glory of the sun, he's come into the world. He's reflected the reality of divine religion, dispelled the darkness of imitations, laid the foundation of new teachings, and resurrected or resuscitated the world. Again, they're model statements. If we take them and make them our own, we'll be able to, I think with an added sense of conviction, deliver them to people. Once again, he said, Baha'u'llah has provided the remedy for the ailments which now afflict the human world, solved the difficult problems of individual, social, national, and universal welfare, and laid the foundation of divine reality upon which material and spiritual civilization are to be founded throughout the centuries before us. Baha'u'llah has given full teachings to the world which are conducive to fellowship and unity in religion. Through the education and training of Baha'u'llah, he has led these souls to this standard and given them teachings which ensure eternal illumination. Anyone who becomes well-versed in his teachings will say, "Verily I declare that these words constitute the illumination of humanity, that this is the everlasting honor, that these are heavenly precepts and the cause of never-ending life among men." And of course, he calls on us all to live in accord with the teachings of Baha'u'llah. Then he explains that the principles that he proclaims in his trip are new principles. And he shows over and over how each one of them has never appeared in a holy book in the past. Entirely new teachings, all of the principles. Maybe we haven't thought of that. People say, "Oh yeah, well, I believe that too." Yes, you do, but it's not because you read it in your holy book, because it's not there. They've now, this spirit and the essence of what Baha'u'llah has revealed has spread into the lifeblood of humanity in a sense. So many things don't strike. Look at, of course, the strides that are made with the equality of women and men with respect to their rights and privileges. Abdu'l was very outspoken. You imagine a man coming from the Orient, just out of prison, a life of imprisonment, meeting with the leading suffragettes and encouraging them to go forward. You have to have the vote. This was big news. It was in all the newspapers. Peace prophet supports suffragettes. Peace prophet attends Black University, speaks to NAACP at that time. Well, they were bold steps. You'll want to see how at the end of each of these principles, if you can also it'll be possible for you if you want to download this compilation. It's certainly not definitive, but it's a start on these various themes that Abdu'l spoke about. And it's here that over and over he says, these were the principles, the teachings of Baha'u'llah. These have not appeared in past holy books. He talks about that over and over again. 3:30, is that what our limit? Huh? Yes. 10 minutes. Okay. Abdu'l a number of times addressed the question of two trees, the tree of good and the tree of evil. He says there's not two trees of humanity, there's only one. Now today Baha'u'llah proclaims the oneness, the one tree of mankind. We are all the leaves of one tree and the leaves of one branch and the fruits of the same. Because it was so embedded in the religions of the past that they were the part of the good tree and the others were the tree of Cain or of the devil and the evil tree. So that this reversal of that and the establishment of a single principle of all the religions coming from one source and all of us being the children of one God, it becomes a very interesting teaching. First, says Abdu'l, he has proclaimed the oneness of mankind and specialized religious teachings for existing human conditions. The first form of dissension arises from religious differences. Baha'u'llah has given full teachings to the world which are conducive to fellowship and unity in religion. Throughout past centuries, each system of religious belief has boasted of its own superiority and excellence, abasing and scorning the validity of all others. Each has proclaimed its own belief as the light and all the others as darkness. Religions have considered the world of humanity as two trees, one divine and merciful, the other satanic. They themselves, the branches, leaves, and fruits of the divine tree, and all others who differ from them in belief, the product of a tree which is satanic. Therefore, sedition and warfare, bloodshed and strife have been continuous amongst them. The greatest cause of human alienation has been religion, because each party has considered the belief of the other as anathema and deprived of the mercy of God. These things need to be explained to people. I mean, the fact that a messenger of God has come and said such things and established such truths, the person has to react to them. Maybe at first they may be fearful, they may react in some, one has to judge how intense a message you deliver, but let us start to act on them. Because basically we would all like to see the world living in peace and reconciliation and agreement. But not if I have to go to hell over it. That would be a problem. You know, if I lose my position among the 666,000, that wouldn't be a good thing. After all, the world's going to hell anyway. It says it's going to, be destroyed when Jesus comes. Sometimes it's very hard to sell peace. And now they've come up with this idea of world order is the satanic tool, make you think that there's going to be a new world order and everything's going to get hunky-dory. No. They're working harder than we are. Somehow, I feel, at times, with the kind of evangelistic things that they come up with, to try to disprove the faith. Somebody from Iran who's in the know told me in Europe, he said that the Iranian government spends millions of dollars on units to destroy the Baha'i faith. They have all kinds of levels of students working on studying the Baha'i writings and finding anything they can point out. And also, of course, they attack personally the Baha'is and destroy their lives and go behind their neighbors. And there's endless. There's a big investment. They see what Baha'u'llah says. The best of them know what he says, that God has wrested power from the ecclesiastics. And they see it disappearing and waning. And Baha'u'llah condemns the Shias. He says mostly they're mercantile in their approach to religion. They're sacking the country of all the money it has, of all the wealth it has. In fact, they simply steal from the Baha'is because they're in this wrong tree here. We can pick their fruit, it doesn't matter, Abdu'l says that discord deprives humanity of the eternal favors of God. Therefore, we must forget all imaginary causes of difference and seek the very fundamentals of the divine religions in order that we may associate in perfect love and accord and consider humankind as one family, the surface of the earth as one nationality, and all races as one humanity. Let us live under the protection of God, attaining eternal happiness in this world and everlasting life in the world to come. By biased treatment of any people, nations, races, we are flying directly in the face of God's policy, Abdu'l says. We're violating the policy of God, which is the oneness of mankind and the well-being of the whole human race. And he says that's what his faith has come for, the well-being and happiness of the human race. We'll go on with this in another session. Thank you very much.